6, but before we dive in to Daniel 6, we need to back up and discuss what we talked about 2 weeks ago, and that was Daniel 5. Now, it's in those verses, Daniel 5, that Babylon is under a new king. King Nebuchadnezzar has died, and King Nabonidus is now reigning. However, King Nabonidus has left the region of Babylon, leaving his son in charge, that being King Belshazzar, which is known as a co-regency, the way in which they reigned, where you would have two kings at the same time because one has left that region. And normally, if the father, that being the king, has left the region, the oldest son would take over. So we see here that King Belshazzar is ruling over the Babylonian Empire at this time. Now, it's in these verses that King Belshazzar is having this magnificent feast, if you will, with all the elites. He's also dining with his wives and concubines. And according to him and all the elites, this feast is going well. So what does the king do during this feast, during this massive party? He has an idea. Here's his idea. Since this party is going so well, here's what we need to do. Let's go take the gold and silver vessels, the ones in which King Nebuchadnezzar stole from the temple of God, and let's drink from them. Let's party using those vessels from the temple to worship our false pagan gods and also whatever debauchery was taking place during that meal. Well, as they begin to drink from the Lord's vessels, something miraculous happens. A hand. Yes, just a hand begins to write on the wall. Now you may be asking, what is the explanation for this hand? I do not know, other than it was God performing a miracle, allowing just a hand to write on the wall. You can't explain it? No. How can you? There was a hand writing on the wall. Now, you could imagine being at this party full of all the elites, king's wives, his concubines. Everyone's having a great time. The gold and silver vessels are holding a liquid that is making everyone extremely happy. Seems like we're heading in the right direction. But then there's this hand. So you picture yourself at this party, just for a moment, if you will. Music's blaring. And then you see one person turn and look. And someone looks at that person as they're looking at something. So that person turns and looks. And then before you know it, everybody is turning and looking at this hand writing on the wall. I don't know if you've really pondered it before. What would you do if you just saw a hand writing on the wall? Well, I can tell you what King Belshazzar does. He soils himself. And I don't think anybody in here would make fun of him for doing that. This isn't something that you see daily, but he soils himself. But not only does he soil himself, the color drains from his face. So the king, once he somewhat composes himself, he cries out to his wise men, the very ones that he has called to understand dreams and interpretations. He calls for them. So here come the wise men, being the Chaldeans, the astrologers. And he looks at them, and I'm sure they're looking at him, and they're noticing something's off about him, and he's probably smelling a little bit at this point. But he's like, this is what I'm going to need you guys to do. I'm going to need you all to go over to that wall and tell me what it says. Well, I'm sure they're looking at this wall, and we don't know if God has somehow kind of, I don't know, isn't allowing them, blinded them so that they couldn't read the words? Or it very well could be that the wise men are just like, I'm not getting close to this floating hand that has floated words on that wall. So the queen hears this commotion coming from the banquet hall. And more than likely, this queen is King Belshazzar's mother. So she walks in, looks at her son, notices that there is something off about him. And then she too looks at the wall, sees the writing, the wise men surrounding, and he's like, Mom, if it is his mother, Queen, they can't tell me what's on the wall. And what does she do? Why? Son, King, why have you not reached out to Daniel? Daniel's over these men. Why have you left him out? Well, we know the reason why he's left Daniel out. For Daniel serves the true living God that Belshazzar doesn't recognize. So eventually, the king breaks down and he says, you know what? Bring Daniel in. And as he brings Daniel in, he doesn't look at Daniel and say, my friend Daniel, the one who oversees all these wise men. No, he practically mocks him for being enslaved, that man from the land in which they conquered. But he looks at him and says, can you tell me what these words say? And then what does he do? He bribes Daniel. And what does Daniel say about this bribe? I don't need it. And I think one of the main reasons why, in which he says, I do not need it, is because you cannot bribe God. You cannot pay off God. So, Daniel walks over to the writing, looks at the wall, and he reads it. Mene, tekel, parsin, which is Aramaic. The interpretation is, Mene, God has numbered your days. Well, that was pretty straightforward. Not just once, but twice, he says it. God has numbered your days. Tekel. For every single sin is going to be counted against you, O King Belshazzar. And then parsin. And your kingdom will be divided. What happened that very night, O church? That very night, Darius the Mede killed King Belshazzar, took over the Babylonian Empire. It's amazing in how God is working through these powerful men. For these powerful men consider themselves to be God. King Nebuchadnezzar was humbled by the true living God. Belshazzar was warned by the true living God. Did not take that warning, but was warned by the true living God. And there's something that we're seeing all throughout this. Now, this is two kings that Daniel has served under. Do you notice that Daniel is a man who does not retreat from this foreign empire? He was in the culture of these empires, but not a part of it. He didn't seclude himself, locking himself away in a room, saying, no one talk to me, I don't want to be a part of it, let me just serve the Lord here on my own. That's not what happens. No, instead, he served the empire at this point now for almost 70 years. We're now coming in to the empire which is now being run by King Darius. The Babylonian Empire has been replaced by the Medes and the Persians. And yet Daniel keeps on serving. All right. Let's look at verse 1. We're going to run through verses 1 through 5 here. It pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 satraps, to be throughout the whole kingdom, and over them 3 high officials, of whom Daniel was one, to whom these satraps should give account, so that the king might suffer no loss. Then this Daniel became distinguished above all the other high officials and satraps, because an excellent spirit was in him. And the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. Then the high officials and the satraps, and remember, satraps are just governors throughout the region of Persia. The officials and satraps sought to find a ground for complaint against Daniel with regard to the kingdom, but they could find no ground for complaint or any fault, because he was faithful and no error or fault was found in him. Then these men said, "We shall not find any ground for complaint against this Daniel unless we find it in connection with the law of his God." Daniel, throughout these years, these decades of serving these kings, he demonstrates this remarkable dedication and skill in his service to the empires. Which does what? It paves the way for his continuous promotions. Now, granted, these empires are wicked. They are wicked rulers, and yet we still have Daniel serving faithfully to the Lord. Now, this King Darius, he recognizes the need for a more diversified leadership structure. So what does he do? King Darius appoints 3 administrators to manage the 120 satraps, or the provincial rulers of his kingdom. It's going to help him out to be able to divide these regions and these governors. Daniel is one of them. He was honored to be chosen as one of these 3 administrators. This appointment, though, it does reflect an earlier promise made by Belshazzar. Do you recall that promise where he had intended to make Daniel the 3rd ruler of Babylon? And here we see it playing out. In a sense, Daniel's contributions, his faithfulness, earned him this recognition, even after Belshazzar's death. So a question may be asked, can a Christian serve in a secular government and still be faithful to the Lord? Absolutely. Again, this is something else that we do not see throughout history, not through the Old Testament, not through the New Testament. We do not seclude ourselves from society. How can we witness to the lost if we're locked away from them? Now, it doesn't mean we embrace their sinful culture or their lifestyles, because we're still called to be faithful to the Lord. So Daniel excels greatly in this position that Darius envisioned, so much so that it looks like he's going to be given this prominent role of overseeing the entire kingdom. Again, I want to go back to saying this. Corruption was widespread throughout these empires. They were wicked. And yet Daniel never took part in it. You know what Daniel could have told himself? I'm looking at my decades here serving. I was ripped away from my homeland. Everything was stripped from me. The majority of my friends, family. This isn't my home. Maybe if I just take a bribe every now and then, I can kind of have them pay off my past. I mean, I'm worth that. As a matter of fact, I see everyone else around me doing it. So what would it hurt? God, I'm worthy of this. But that's not what he does. Daniel was there to serve the Lord in every single aspect of his life, including his job. Every single aspect. He reflected the light of the Lord so much that even those who claimed not to believe in his God, and I say that because I don't believe in atheists, all of us recognize that there is the true living God. You may not accept him, but you know he is there. But this light of the Lord that Daniel reflects, when the high officials tried digging up dirt on him to get him removed, what do they say to one another? You know, guys, do you know what they say to one another? Answer the phone. No. Do you know what they say to one another? Here's the thing, guys. We've been around him for almost 70 years now. We have a history of Daniel. What are we going to find? I mean, he worships his God like we've never seen before. He doesn't take bribes. He's not stealing from the top, even when no one is going to notice it. None of those things. The only way that we're going to be able to find fault in Daniel is going to be in regard to the law of his God. That's what we have to do. So they're going to use the holiness of Daniel, only through what God has given him, to go against him. Now, this should not come as a surprise to us believers, but maybe it does at times. And the reason why I say that is because for so many of us, we've been taught, not here, but we've been taught that God loves you and he has a wonderful plan for your life. The closer you walk with God, the holier your life is going to be. It's going to be a bed of roses. Well, church, it's actually the exact opposite. The closer you walk with the Lord, the more this world is going to despise you. You are to expect turmoil, tribulations. Persecution is real, and it's going to happen. You're going to be mocked. You're going to lose friends, possibly be fired from your job, maybe even martyred. All for the sake of following God. This is to be expected when you do not conform to this world. Now look at verse 6. Then these high officials and satraps came by agreement to the king and said to him, O King Darius, live forever this greeting. All the high officials of the kingdom, the prefects and the satraps, the counselors and the governors are agreed that the king should establish an ordinance and enforce an injunction that whoever makes petition to any god or man for 30 days, except to you, O king. It's pretty smooth on their part, isn't it? We're going to flatter him. We're going to boast him up. Except to you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions. Now, O king, establish the injunction and sign the document so that it cannot be changed according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be revoked. Therefore, King Darius signed the document and injunction. Daniel had no skeletons in his closet, so they move on with their plan. Let us go to the king. Let us make this recommendation, and hopefully he'll make it a decree. Why? Because it goes against the very God that Daniel worships, the very God that Daniel prays to. So, king, what if we say over the next 30 days, no man in your empire can worship another man or another god. It all has to come to you. You're going to be the mediator. Sounds like some of the churches we still have today. You're going to be the mediator. The king hears this and he's like, you know what, I kind of like this idea. Now, I do not believe that this is some type of religious attack here. I tend to hold that this is more of a political play than a religious play. They probably sold to the king, look, you can bring the empire together by them coming to you because there's numerous gods out there that they're worshiping, but you can bring all the people together so that you're the mediator to go out to all the different gods. He likes this idea. But there's something else interesting here. You have all these important officials there, right? But how does he not recognize that one of the three, that being Daniel, isn't there? Well, I can tell you why he doesn't notice that, because the flattery was so great. What's it matter? I'm going to be the mediator. Come to me. Where's Daniel? Doesn't matter. Look at verse 10. Well, we do know that Darius signs this law into effect. Look at verse 10. We find out that Daniel hears about what has taken place. When Daniel knew that the document had been signed, he went to his house where he had windows in his upper chamber open toward Jerusalem. He got down on his knees 3 times a day and prayed and gave thanks before his God as he had done previously. Notice the actions of Daniel here. Once he found out, what didn't he do? Did he run to his friends and say, listen, guys, you're not going to believe what's happened, how unfair this King Darius is and what he's making us do? He doesn't run to the king and say, what have you done? You've gone against me. You've gone against my God. That's not what he does. He goes home to the place where he prays. Notice it doesn't take some type of catastrophe to drive Daniel to his knees. This was common for him. As a matter of fact, even when he hears about this law and what it means for him, that doesn't even stop him from praying. Now, I will say this. There is no command in Scripture for us as believers to pray 3 times a day into a certain direction. You hear that? It's not there. So why is Daniel doing this? Well, we know from the writings of King Solomon, 300 years prior to this, Solomon wrote of a time when God's people's sin would be so great that they would be removed from the promised land. Oh, kind of sounds like what's happening with Daniel. In Solomon's writing, he penned that the ones praying should pray towards the temple. The Lord will hear them and show favor upon them. Again, it's not us today. It was for a specific time, and we see Daniel fulfilling what Solomon wrote. Now look at verse 11. Then these men came by agreement and found Daniel making petition and plea before his God. Do you think this was difficult for these men to do? Do you think they were sitting and waiting in the bushes saying, well, he's got to pray sometime, right? No, they know Daniel. They know this is what he does. This is an easy setup for them. That's how loyal Daniel is to God. And if you think I'm telling you to be like Daniel, good luck. Because you're never going to be. Daniel didn't hide his faith. He wasn't ashamed of it. And every single one of us here, we have failed on that end already. He knew what was going to happen to him if he was found worshiping the true living God during this 30-day period when this decree was put into effect. Didn't stop him. The men knew they would be able to catch Daniel. And then you think about that faith of this man. If we catch you praying, you're going to be thrown into a lion's den. That's not a quick death. You are ripped apart. You're not standing before a firing squad thinking one bullet to the head and don't feel a thing. No. You're going to be a meal for lions. You're going to hear them crushing your bones. You're going to feel them tear you apart. Daniel doesn't say, well, I'm going to still pray to God, but it's going to be in a closet with a locked door in the dark of night. Not Daniel. Now, God could have blinded those powerful men. He could have kept them from seeing Daniel as he prayed 3 times a day, but that wasn't God's plan to save him from the trials, but to save him as he went through them. Believers, we're not promised comfort. We're promised trials and tribulations. His promise to us, though, is to sanctify us through those trials, through those tribulations. Now look at verse 12. I know what you're thinking. We're never going to get through this, but yes, we are. Bear with me. Verse 12. Then they came near. So the powerful men, the governors that they see Daniel are like, we got him. We're going to get him removed. Then they came near and said before the king concerning the injunction, O king, did you not sign an injunction that anyone who makes petition to any god or man within 30 days, except you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions? Did you remember when you signed that? Remember your mighty handwriting, that signature, as you just put that law into effect, that wonderful, gracious, powerful law, O king. You remember doing that? The king answered and said, the thing stands fast according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be revoked. Now, as the king probably turned his head, the powerful officials start giving each other high five. We got him. It worked. Notice they didn't announce right away who they caught going against the king. No. Instead, they went back to that decree, that wonderful law that you have made, O king. Can't believe your powerful mind and how you thought of it. Wow. Now, remember, king, that those rules, they can't be revoked. That's how powerful your signature is a bond that cannot be broken. Now, of course, the king affirms this signature, holds to this new law that he has made that cannot be revoked. Look at verse 13. Then they answered and said before the king, Daniel. As at that time, the king's stomach just had to drop. One who is one of the exiles from Judah, not who is over the wise men, not the one who is now one of the 3 overseeing the 120 satraps, so not that one, no, the slave. He pays no attention to you, O king, or the injunction you have signed, but makes his petition 3 times a day. Do you see how wicked and evil these men are? They're going against the one who worships the true living God, the very one they can't dig up any dirt on. That's who they go after for their own pride, for their own glory. They even lie about him. They set this king up perfectly. And now here they've revealed who has disobeyed this new decree. Verse 14, then the king, when he heard these words, was much distressed and set his mind to deliver Daniel. And he labored till the sun went down to rescue him. This is something that King Darius did not want to do. He respected Daniel. Not Daniel's God, but because Daniel was faithful and holy, he respected Daniel. So he spends hours trying to figure out what he can do to get around this death sentence. Surely there was something he could do. Eventually the men returned and reminded him of the law. Look at verse 15. Then these men came by agreement to the king and said to the king, Know, O king, that it is the law of the Medes and Persians that no injunction or ordinance that the king establishes can be charged. See, they understood that King Darius was struggling with this. He didn't want this to happen. Now, Darius could have issued a counter edict, meaning he could have proclaimed that he made an error in this law, that he wanted to take it back. But doing so would have brought his leadership into question. So now you have the pride of Darius or the life of Daniel. And sadly, we see what Darius does. Instead of losing face before the people, Darius decides to hold to this new law and cast Daniel into the lion's den. Look at verse 16. Then the king commanded, and Daniel was brought and cast into the den of lions. The king declared to Daniel, May your God whom you serve continually deliver you. Again, there is no such thing as an atheist. Darius knows this. And I've been watching you. I've been watching you worship this God of yours. And there's something different here. I'm not going to recognize him, but I see it. And a stone was brought and laid on the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet and the signet of his lords, that nothing might be changed concerning Daniel. He could have done something, but pride. So Darius abandons Daniel. Darius, the unbeliever, the idol worshiper, even though he denies the true living God, he knows that he exists, along with everyone else who has ever lived. For even says to Daniel, May your God whom you serve continually deliver you. But it's because he serves this God continually that's got him there. Do you not see the irony here, King Darius? To make sure that no one comes in the night and tries to rescue Daniel, the king's signet is on the stone. You can't mess with it. Verse 18. And the king went to his palace and spent the night fasting. No diversions were brought to him, and sleep fled from him. Think about that, King Darius. All this comfort surrounding him. All this glorious food and drink nearby. And yet he can't rest. He can't eat. Anxiety is driving him crazy. There's no solace. Only anxious moments not allowing sleep to enter. Now let's go to the lion's den. Palace, comfort, lion's den. Look at verse 19. Told you we're going to make it. Then, at break of day, the king arose and went in haste to the den of lions. And as he came near to the den where Daniel was, he cried out in a tone of anguish. The king declared to Daniel, O Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to deliver you from the lions? We don't know how long that silence stood, but for Darius, it had to seem like hours. Then Daniel said to the king, O king, live forever. Greetings. My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths, and they have not harmed me because I was found blameless before him. And also before you, O king, I have done no harm. And the king was exceedingly glad and commanded that Daniel be taken up out of the den. So Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no kind of harm was found on him because he had trusted in his God. The king has this sleepless night finally coming to an end as he sees the light of day starting to break. He's pacing back and forth all night, wondering about Daniel. He rushes down to the den. There's no telling how far he was away before he starts shouting to Daniel. Please, just let me hear his voice and not lions munching on bones. And he hears calm, cool, and collected voice of Daniel. Not a scratch, not a hair out of place, because God sent an angel. For what reason? To keep the lions from harming Daniel. Darius was troubled all night, anxiety-ridden. Daniel was chilling with an angel in the lion's den. Now we're not certain what that must have been like that evening. What does that look like? I bet Daniel didn't sleep much, not because he was surrounded by lions. He probably used one of them as a pillow. But could you imagine having that conversation for 12 hours with that heavenly being? What would you talk about? Darius is pacing. Daniel is chilling with an angel of the Lord with lions. God had preserved Daniel by sending him an angel. God was with Daniel during that trying time. Church, we see that peace doesn't come by way of the comforts of this world, but in knowing and worshiping and believing in the Creator of this world. That's where true peace lies. And listen, it wasn't as if God declawed those lions or defanged them or made their stomachs so full they couldn't eat. He didn't do any of that. And you may be saying, well, how do you know? Well, let's go to verse 24. And the king commanded, and those men who had maliciously accused Daniel were brought and cast into the den of the lions, their children, children, not the children. Their children and their wives. And before they reached the bottom of the den, the lions overpowered them and broke all their bones in pieces. I don't ever really recall that part when I was in Sunday school. But why did this happen? Daniel was found innocent before the Lord. Why? Because his faith was in the Lord. His faith is in the one who was promised all the way back in the garden, who would crush the serpent's head, the one who pays every believer's sin debt in full. That's how he was found innocent before the Lord. But not the ones who conspired against him. The ones who went against Daniel. Again, this is further proof of the one who holds the power of life and death. And it's not the kings. It's not the presidents. It's not the most powerful man in the village. Because what did Darius do? Darius threw Daniel in the lion's den thinking that was it. He's gone. Nebuchadnezzar threw the three in the burning inferno thinking that, they're gone. But what does God say? No. It's not their time yet. I'm the one who is sovereign over life and death. Now, this may come across as not very loving, and I don't mean for it to. But when you look at the ones who had conspired against Daniel, and it wasn't just them who was thrown into the lion's den, but their family. That just doesn't seem right. Again, I go back to, who is the judge? Is it you, oh man? But because if it is, you're wrong. God is the judge over every single person who has ever lived. God is the ultimate judge. He knows who his elect are, and he knows who aren't. Why? Because he's elected them. He found fault in not only the men who conspired against him, but also their family. Again, maybe this is the reason why we didn't cover it that much in Sunday school when I was 7. But so often we're offended by the Word of God because he talks about children being killed by lions. But who knows man? Who knows the heart of man? God. If you're offended by this, you don't have a high enough view of the Holy of Holies. For the lion showed no mercy upon the guilty. In response to this miracle that Darius has witnessed, he goes forward by issuing that counter edict, nullifying his original plan. Forget the 30 days of only coming to me for prayers. Here's the new one. Look at verse 25. Then King Darius wrote to all the peoples, nations, and languages that dwelt in all the earth, peace be multiplied to you. I make a decree that in all my royal dominion, people are to tremble and fear before the God of Daniel. Another king saying, it's not me. For he is the living God, enduring forever. His kingdom shall never be destroyed. Why? They just crushed the former king and took over his empire. But they're seeing something about the true living God. You can't crush his kingdom. We've tried killing 4 of his, and nothing happened. They walked out of a fire. This guy just walked out of a den full of lions that just crushed an entire family. His kingdom shall never be destroyed, and his dominion shall be to the end. He delivers and rescues. He works signs and wonders in heaven and on earth. Well, duh, you just witnessed that one. He who has saved Daniel from the power of the lions. He's done it once again, God has, bringing the powerful pagan king to acknowledge and recognize the greatness and power of God. He even says, for it's only God's kingdom that's going to last forever. Now, we know that you cannot force an empire to worship God. You can't do that. But what we're seeing here is the king saying, listen, what I've witnessed, it's definitely not me. It's not those other gods in which I worship. There's something different here. Verse 28. So this Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian. God kept Daniel, preserved him. And although I don't believe that Daniel ever returned back home, he did return to his true heavenly home, though. So what is that we've seen? Well, we see that the Lord is the true living judge. And it's his verdict alone is the only one that counts. So I say this, if you're worried about man, I say why? Well, what does it matter? I do not believe there is a greater honor in this world than to be persecuted for your faith. If that comes, please know that you will have a peace like no other because of the one in who you serve. And nothing is going to take place that God hasn't decreed. And it very well could be during that time of persecution, you were rescued. Or it very well could be that during that time of persecution, you are killed. But regardless of the outcome, remember that all glory goes to him. Okay. Went long. Apologize on a Wednesday night. I tried not to go to 8 o'clock. But if we want to shorten the questions and comments, feel free.